Sheikh Omar Al-Hadid collapsed at his own wedding, but when doctors examined his blood, a hidden toxin led investigators straight to Maria Santos, his pregnant Filipina ex, and a secret far more dangerous than anyone expected. Sheikh Omar Al-Hadid had spent years building a reputation that few could challenge. His name was associated with luxury developments, private investments, and exclusive business deals that stretched across the Gulf region. Everything about his life was controlled, calculated, and carefully presented to the public. When news of his wedding to Layla Hassan was announced, it immediately drew attention from influential circles. The event was not just a personal celebration. It was a statement of power, stability, and prestige. The ceremony was planned in one of Omar's most luxurious hotel ballrooms in Dubai. Every detail was handled by top-tier planners. Crystal chandeliers lit the vast hall, floral arrangements lined every aisle, and a live orchestra played soft music as guests arrived. The guest list included politicians, investors, and high-profile figures from across the region. Security was tight but discreet, with guards positioned strategically throughout the venue and surveillance systems monitoring every corner. Omar made his entrance with confidence, dressed in an elegant traditional outfit that reflected both wealth and cultural pride. Cameras flashed as he greeted guests, maintaining his usual calm expression. Layla followed soon after, her presence equally composed, completing the image of a perfect union. To the outside world, everything appeared flawless. Behind the scenes, however, there were subtle details that would later become important. Before the ceremony began, Omar had spent time in a private suite preparing for the event. Only a small number of trusted staff members had access to this area. Refreshments were delivered to him shortly before he entered the ballroom. At the time, nothing about the moment seemed unusual. As the ceremony progressed, a few observers noticed minor changes in Omar's behavior. He appeared slightly distracted, his movements less sharp than usual. Those closest to him assumed it was the pressure of the occasion. Hosting such a high-profile event came with expectations, and even someone as composed as Omar could feel the strain. Minutes later, the atmosphere shifted. While standing before the guests, Omar suddenly lost balance. His posture weakened, and within seconds he collapsed onto the floor. The music stopped instantly. Conversations faded into silence as confusion spread across the room. Security personnel moved quickly, forming a barrier around him while medical staff rushed forward. Emergency procedures were activated immediately. Omar was carefully lifted and transported out of the ballroom through a secured exit, away from the public eye. The celebration ended abruptly, leaving guests in shock as they tried to understand what had just happened. At the private hospital, doctors worked rapidly to stabilize him. Initial assessments ruled out common causes such as heart failure or exhaustion. His condition did not match typical medical emergencies. Blood samples were taken for detailed analysis, and the results revealed something far more disturbing. A rare toxin had been detected in his bloodstream. The substance was designed to act slowly, entering the body without immediate symptoms before triggering sudden physical collapse. This indicated that whatever had happened was not accidental. As medical staff secured his condition, authorities were quietly informed. What began as a medical emergency at a wedding was now a criminal investigation involving precision, planning, and someone with access. And as investigators prepared to trace the source, one detail from Omar's past began to surface. Something that would soon connect the case to a name no one at the wedding had expected. The investigation began quietly, away from public attention, as Sheikh Omar remained under constant observation in a secured wing of the hospital. Doctors stabilized his condition, but the presence of the toxin in his bloodstream raised immediate alarm among authorities. Specialized toxicologists were brought in to analyze the substance in detail. Their findings confirmed that the compound was not naturally occurring and required careful preparation. It was designed to dissolve slowly in liquid, remain undetected for hours, and then trigger a sudden physical collapse. This level of precision suggested planning by someone with knowledge of chemistry and timing. Investigators moved quickly to reconstruct Omar's final hours before the incident. Security footage from the hotel was collected and reviewed frame by frame. Every individual who had access to Omar's private suite was identified and questioned. The list was small, limited to trusted staff, security personnel, and catering members assigned specifically to his preparation area. Attention soon focused on the refreshments delivered shortly before the ceremony. Records showed that a tray of drinks had been sent to Omar's suite about 40 minutes before he entered the ballroom. The delivery had been approved through standard procedures, and the items had passed through the hotel's internal security checks. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. However, forensic testing of the glass Omar had used revealed faint traces of the same toxin found in his blood. The contamination was subtle but consistent with the compound's properties. This discovery confirmed that the poisoning had occurred inside the private suite, narrowing the window of opportunity to a very specific moment. Security teams reviewed footage of the corridor outside the suite. Several staff members were seen entering and exiting, but all appeared to follow routine patterns. Then investigators noticed a brief gap in the camera feed lasting just a few seconds. It was a minor interruption, something that might normally go unnoticed. But in a high-security environment, even a small gap raised serious concerns. At the same time, background investigations began into individuals connected to Omar's personal life. Financial records, past relationships, and private communications were carefully examined. During this process, one name appeared repeatedly in archived files: Maria Santos. Maria had once worked as a private nurse during a period when Omar was recovering from a medical condition. Records indicated that she had been trusted with close access to him, handling medications and monitoring his recovery. Over time, her role expanded beyond professional duties, though details of that relationship were not fully documented. The connection had ended suddenly. Financial records showed that Maria received a significant payment shortly before leaving her position. After that, she disappeared from Omar's immediate circle and maintained a low profile. The most surprising discovery came from medical data linked to her recent activity. Investigators learned that Maria was pregnant, and the timeline suggested a possible connection to Omar. This detail introduced a potential motive that could not be ignored. Attempts to locate her became urgent. Her last registered residence in Dubai was empty, and neighbors reported that she had moved out weeks earlier without explanation. Travel databases showed no official departure, indicating she might still be within the country under different identification. As the investigation deepened, the case shifted from a simple poisoning to something far more complex. Whoever had administered the toxin needed access, knowledge, and careful timing. And now, with Maria's name resurfacing alongside her sudden disappearance, the focus began to narrow toward a past that Omar may have believed was long behind him. Investigators intensified their efforts as the focus narrowed toward the moment the toxin had been introduced. Security footage from the hotel became the most critical piece of evidence. Every corridor leading to Sheikh Omar's private suite was examined repeatedly, with analysts slowing down frames and enhancing details that were easy to miss at normal speed. The goal was to identify anyone who did not belong or any movement that broke the routine pattern. One sequence stood out. A staff member wearing a standard hotel uniform was seen walking confidently toward Omar's suite, carrying a service tray. The individual moved with the familiarity of someone who understood the layout and security flow. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. Hotel staff frequently delivered items to high-profile guests, and the presence of a uniform made the entry seem legitimate. However, when investigators cross-checked staff schedules and identification logs, a problem emerged. No employee had been assigned to that delivery at that specific time. The name linked to the uniform access badge belonged to a worker who had been stationed in a completely different area of the hotel during the incident. The uniform had been used as a disguise. Facial recognition systems were applied to the footage, but the results were inconclusive. The individual's face was partially obscured, and subtle changes in appearance made identification difficult. Despite this, analysts began focusing on other details such as posture, walking pattern, and body language. These movement patterns were compared with archived recordings from various sources, including hospital footage from years earlier. Partial match appeared. The gait, the way the tray was held, and the slight tilt of the head aligned closely with previous recordings of Maria Santos. The match was not perfect, but it was strong enough to shift the investigation significantly in her direction. At the same time, financial intelligence teams uncovered transactions that added to the suspicion. Records showed that Maria had recently been involved in payments linked to a private laboratory operating outside strict regulatory oversight. The purchases included chemical compounds that, when combined correctly, could produce a substance similar to the toxin found in Omar's bloodstream. This discovery suggested preparation and access. Investigators began constructing a timeline of Maria's recent activities. Digital traces indicated she had been moving between temporary accommodations, avoiding long-term stays and official registrations. This pattern suggested an attempt to remain unnoticed. Yet, just as the case seemed to point clearly toward her, new information complicated the narrative. A forensic review of Omar's private communications revealed that he had received a series of anonymous warnings in the days leading up to the wedding. These messages did not contain threats in a direct sense but hinted at unresolved matters from his past. The language was vague, referencing consequences and actions that could not be undone. The warnings had not been taken seriously at the time. Now they appeared significant. Investigators began to question whether Maria was acting independently or being influenced by someone else. The level of planning required for the poisoning suggested coordination, possibly involving individuals with greater resources and broader motives. The theory of a simple personal revenge began to weaken. Instead, the possibility of a larger operation started to emerge, one where Maria's involvement might only be part of a much more complex plan. As the investigation widened, attention shifted beyond Sheikh Omar's personal relationships and toward the deeper layers of his business dealings. Financial analysts and intelligence teams began reviewing confidential records tied to his companies. What they found revealed a network of complex transactions, hidden partnerships, and unresolved disputes that had never reached public attention. One particular deal stood out among the rest. Months before the wedding, Omar had withdrawn from a high-value international investment involving offshore partners. The project had been structured through multiple intermediaries, making it difficult to trace ownership and responsibility. When Omar stepped away, the move caused significant financial damage to several investors who had committed large amounts of capital. Among those affected was a figure who operated quietly but held considerable influence. This individual rarely appeared in official documents, instead working through layers of representatives and shell companies. Despite the lack of visibility, intelligence reports suggested that this investor had access to resources, connections, and networks capable of organizing complex operations without direct exposure. Investigators began to consider a new angle. The poisoning might not have been driven solely by personal motives connected to Maria Santos. It could have been part of a calculated strategy tied to financial retaliation. Removing Omar at a public event would create chaos, destabilize his business empire, and potentially open opportunities for control over his assets. At the same time, new surveillance footage surfaced from outside the hotel. Cameras positioned along nearby streets captured a vehicle arriving shortly before the incident. The timing matched the window in which the disguised staff member entered the building. The vehicle remained parked briefly before leaving the area. Authorities traced the car to a rental agency, but the documentation used to secure the vehicle was false. The identity provided did not exist in official records. Payment for the rental had been processed through layered transactions, moving through multiple accounts designed to hide the original source. Digital forensic teams followed the financial trail as far as possible, uncovering connections to offshore accounts linked to the same network involved in the failed investment deal. While the evidence was indirect, the pattern suggested coordination at a higher level. Despite this, Maria Santos remained central to the case. Her disappearance, her medical background, and her connection to the toxin could not be ignored. Investigators now faced a more complicated question. Was she the primary actor, or had she been placed in a position where her involvement would draw attention away from others? Further analysis of her recent digital activity revealed encrypted communications exchanged with unknown contacts. These messages contained instructions, locations, and time references, all carefully coded to avoid easy interpretation. The structure of the communication suggested external guidance rather than independent planning. Meanwhile, Sheikh Omar's condition in the hospital began to stabilize. Doctors reported gradual improvement, though the long-term effects of the toxin were still uncertain. As he recovered, security around him intensified, with limited access granted only to essential personnel. Investigators understood that time was critical. Evidence was becoming more complex, and the longer Maria remained unlocated, the greater the risk of losing key information. The case had evolved far beyond a single act of poisoning. It now pointed toward a coordinated operation involving financial motives, deception, and careful manipulation. And somewhere within that operation, Maria Santos remained the missing link that could expose the truth behind everything. The breakthrough came after days of tracing fragmented digital signals that Maria Santos had unknowingly left behind. Cyber investigators detected a brief activation of a secure communication app linked to one of her previous contacts. The signal lasted only seconds, but it was enough to triangulate a location on the outskirts of Dubai, in a quiet residential district far from the city's usual attention. Authorities moved quickly, surrounding the property before entering. Inside, they found Maria. She was alive, but her condition was weak and unstable. Medical teams immediately noticed symptoms that were difficult to ignore. Tests confirmed that she had been exposed to the same toxin used on Sheikh Omar, though in a much smaller amount. The dosage had been controlled enough to weaken her, but not enough to cause collapse. This discovery shifted the entire direction of the case. Maria was no longer just a suspect. She was also a victim. Inside the residence, investigators uncovered a collection of evidence that revealed how deeply she had been involved and how carefully she had been manipulated. Financial records showed that large sums of money had been transferred to her through indirect channels. At first, these payments appeared to be compensation, but a deeper analysis revealed patterns of control. Funds were released in stages, often tied to specific actions she was instructed to complete. Encrypted messages recovered from hidden devices painted a clearer picture. The instructions she received were precise, guiding her movements step by step. She had been told where to go, what to wear, and how to access restricted areas. The hotel uniform, the timing of the delivery, and even the placement of the glass had all been planned in advance. Her role had been designed to appear central, making her the obvious suspect once the poisoning was discovered. Further evidence suggested that she had not fully understood the consequences of her actions. The instructions she followed were presented in a way that minimized suspicion, framing the task as something less severe than it truly was. By the time the truth became clear, it was too late for her to step away. Investigators then focused on identifying the individual or group orchestrating the operation. The financial trail, though heavily concealed, eventually pointed toward the same offshore network connected to Sheikh Omar's abandoned investment deal. The hidden investor who had suffered losses now appeared to have taken a far more aggressive approach to regain control. The objective was not just revenge. It was strategic. By eliminating Omar during a highly public event, the mastermind intended to create instability across his business empire. Contracts would be disrupted, leadership structures weakened, and control over key assets could shift under pressure. Maria's involvement ensured that the investigation would initially focus on a personal motive, delaying the discovery of the larger plan. Sheikh Omar eventually recovered, though the incident left lasting consequences. Security around him became more intense, and his business operations underwent significant restructuring to prevent similar vulnerabilities. Maria, now under protection and medical care, became a crucial witness. Her testimony and the evidence recovered from her location allowed investigators to expand the case beyond a single act of poisoning into a coordinated international operation. What began as a shocking collapse at a wedding had uncovered a network of manipulation, hidden motives, and calculated deception. In the end, the truth was not found in the celebration or the public spectacle, but in the quiet details, hidden transactions, encrypted messages, and a single drop of toxin that revealed everything.